Hi, Rich Leiter here, and welcome again. I just finished sharing my thoughts about the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, but I haven't had my fill yet. I just have a few more thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I'll try to do it as briefly as I can. The first one is this. You know, in the beginning of the novel, Victor Frankenstein says that he was raised in an atmosphere in which, let me read it to you. It says, to examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard to me was merely a receptacle of bodies deprived of life. So he's basically saying that he was grown up in an atmosphere and he was trained not to be freaked out by the dark or by spooks or by gore or churchyards where bodies are decomposing. He was grown up to have a very objective view of these things, as a scientist would be expected to have. He says, now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. A charnel house is a place where the remains of bodies are kept. My attention was fixed upon every object, the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. So he's saying basically that he was the stuff that would make a normal, average, ordinary human being freak out. He was inured to. He was an objective scientist, he's saying. And he says that the dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials. So basically, Frankenstein is saying that the sight of blood and guts and nerves and gore is no big deal to him, being an anatomist and a scientist. He steeped himself in blood and guts and gore for several years now. It's no big deal to him. And then in the beginning of chapter 5, when he actually brings his creation to life, all of a sudden, his objectivity, his scientific demeanor immediately abandons him, and he freaks out just like any layman would, and he runs out of his laboratory. How do you explain that? This sudden shift from the cool, dispassionate scientist to the scared layman. This seems like a glaring flaw, in my opinion. There's another thing. Why I ask myself, why is Victor Frankenstein freaked out? I mean, he knows what the creature looks like. It's lying there, I guess, on his laboratory table, inanimate. It's an 8-foot tall creature. He sees what it looks like. He knows what to expect. So why be freaked out by it when it actually comes to life so abruptly? And get this, I don't understand why exactly he considers the creature to be horrible and ugly and monstrous looking. Here's what Frankenstein says. He says, how can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Now get this. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Well, I mean, the features, the body parts are all in proportion, and he says that he had selected his features as beautiful. Well, what does that mean to you? It means to me that he created this being to have a pleasing form, not a hideous form. So how come it's hideous all of a sudden? And it says later on, he says that he was filled with breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. I still don't understand if he created this creature with perfect proportions and with a beautiful, what does he say again? Selected his features as beautiful. What exactly all of a sudden makes it so hideous? Mary Shelley does not explain this at all. I'm sorry. She just doesn't. This sudden, immediate transformation, 1 second after life is breathed into this being, that it becomes hideous all of a sudden. He says also, Frankenstein, as he's observing the creature coming to life, his jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. So in other words, he's making the creature out to be some kind of a goon, some kind of an apish goon. But the fact of the matter is, as we learn later on, this is no goon at all. It's an extremely sensitive, articulate, rational being. This is not a goon at all. So how does he perceive it as a goon? Mary Shelley does not explain this in a way which is sad. She doesn't really explain it to me, and I am dissatisfied with this. So, he runs, like I said, I'm repeating myself a little bit from my first podcast, but I want to go into it in a little bit more detail. So he sees the creature is now alive, and he's horrified by it. Still not quite sure why. He runs out of the lab. He leaves the creature there. He runs out of the lab. He goes to his bedroom next door. He sleeps. And he dreams. He has a bad dream. And he goes into the courtyard afterwards to regain his composure. And then he finds his friend Henry Clerval by an inn. And he goes over to Henry and they begin chatting. How are you, Henry? How's the family? And so on. And how's my family? And meanwhile, the monster is still in his laboratory, he thinks. So they go back to his college. And Victor says that he is very, very afraid that he and Henry are going to run into the monster. And he says, I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. But when I became assured that my enemy, first of all, why is it his enemy? He hasn't killed anyone, the creature. He hasn't said anything. So why does he immediately consider the creature his enemy? Not explained, doesn't make any sense to me. But he says, but when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. Why is he clapping his hands with joy? He's acting like some kind of an infant, like out of sight, out of mind. The monster is gone now. Oh, joy. The monster is still there. It's just not in his room anymore. So what is he clapping his hands in joy for? Then what happens is Victor has some kind of a nervous breakdown. And he's nursed back to health by his friend, Henry. And then after he's nursed back to health by Henry, he hasn't breathed a word of any of this to anybody, to Henry or anyone else. He visits his old professors at the college again, and then after he visits his professors at the college, Victor says, Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he, meaning Henry, his friend, turned his eyes towards the east, as affording scope for his spirit of enterprise. The Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention, and I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. Idleness had ever become irksome to me. He just created a living being. He's the only scientist on the face of the earth who has given life to an inanimate object. And within the space of 3 months, he's now studying Sanskrit and Persian with his pal Henry, just because he doesn't want to be idle. Where are his thoughts and his responsibility towards the creation, towards the monster, his enemy? This seems very inappropriate, immature, childlike, and unbelievable. That he just starts, whiling away his time studying languages because he wants the consolation in the works of the Orientalists. Forget about the consolation of the Orientalists. Why don't you track down your creation, Victor? Now, there are a couple more very puzzling things about this chapter 5 when he endows life to his creation. First of all, just think about it. A creature that was once inanimate is now alive. It now is endowed with consciousness. This is a very magical moment. And this is a golden opportunity for Mary Shelley to talk at some length about this mysterious moment when the creature first opens his eyes and looks around him at the world. What is the creature feeling? What is he thinking? If he is thinking, how does he react to it? You could spend a wonderful paragraph, a profound paragraph, talking about consciousness in some way. This is begging to be talked about, and she just passes on the opportunity. I don't get that at all. And also, since the creature is so sensitive and intelligent, and it's first coming to life, it's like it's being born. And since Victor is supposed to be a scientist, doesn't Victor think it might be a good idea to stay with the creature and to try to reassure it? I don't think the creature can speak yet, but in some way, wouldn't it behoove Victor to try to reassure the creature not to be afraid, to try to transition it into life in as mild and benevolent a way as possible? He does just the opposite. He just freaks out and runs away. This is also very puzzling to me, especially since Victor is supposed to be this objective, dispassionate scientist. You missed that one, Mary Shelley. Now I want to talk about the death of Victor's brother in a little more detail, his younger brother, William. As soon as he finds out that William has been strangled, he immediately, I think during a thunderstorm, he catches a flash of the creature, following him. He knows the creature has been following him, and he immediately realizes that it was the creature that had murdered his younger brother. And he's very upset and so on. Doesn't breathe a word of this to anyone. And then, very shortly after his brother is murdered, Victor takes a boat out on the lake in Switzerland where he's located, and he says he passed many hours upon the water. So he wants to calm his nerves by being alone on the water. If it was me, I would immediately want to locate his creation. Then while he's on the water, Victor says, he is kind of, pretty upset about the death of his brother, and he's so, upset about this unpleasant thing that happened. When the creature came to life and he got freaked out by it, he's thinking, maybe I should just jump into the lake and end it all. And then he says, no, I better not, because that would upset my family and it would leave them vulnerable to the mercies of this fiend. Well, again, I would think instead of wanting to commit suicide, Victor should be concerned about protecting his family. Why is he having fantasies of suicide? He should have fantasies of protecting his family and finding out where the creature is. Again, doesn't make much sense to me. And as I say, just for this William episode, to put the cherry on top of the hot fudge sundae, after, a week or 2 weeks or so after the death of his brother, he decides the same thing. He just doesn't want to deal with the fiend, the enemy, the monster. He decides to go on an excursion to Chamonix. Can you explain that to me? Okay, now, I'm almost finished. Here's something else about Victor, which I find reprehensible and immature. Victor says to his cousin Elizabeth, he says, after we're married, the day after we're married, I'm going to let you in on a secret, Elizabeth. And of course, he's going to tell Elizabeth. She'll be the first person he's told, I think. He's going to tell Elizabeth about this whole laboratory experiment where he's trying to create a living being. He's going to lay it on her after they're married. And the question I have is, why does he want to only do it after they're married? Why doesn't he do it before they're married? What would happen is he afraid that if he tells her before they're married that she might look at Victor and think that he's the monster and said, what have you done? I mean, you're responsible for the death of poor William and the framing of Justine Moritz and Henry Clerval, I mean, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you do something about this, Victor? You disgust me. I don't want to marry you. Maybe he's thinking that, and he says, well, once we seal the deal by being married, then she can't leave me anymore. I don't know whether that's what he's thinking or not, but it sounds like an extremely controlling, immature thing to only decide to reveal it to her after they're married. This speaks very, very poorly of Victor, and I do not feel in the least bit sympathetic towards him. Just a couple more things. Now, at the end of the novel, when Victor has been fished out of an ice floe, and he's been put on the ship that Roger Walton is the captain of, and he's told his whole story about the creature, this is very near the end of the story. So at a certain point, the crew, Roger Walton's crew, barges into the cabin where Victor Frankenstein is lying down. He's very sick now. And the crew says to Roger Walton, hey, listen, we don't want to continue going north. We're afraid we're going to be crushed by the ice pack and die. And we don't want to do that. We want you to turn south and we want to go home. And Victor Frankenstein overhears the almost mutinous sailors saying this, and he accuses them of being cowards. And he says, what does he say? Oh, he makes some kind of a speech about how they should seek glory. Hold on a second. I think I have the exact quote. Well, I couldn't find the exact quote, but the sum and substance of it is that Victor Frankenstein says to the crew who's about to mutiny, he says, "Shame for shame! You should seek glory. You shouldn't be cowards." And I'm thinking to myself, what a hypocrite this Victor Frankenstein is. Here, he sought glory, and with trying to create a being out of nothingness, he tried to be glorious and create glory. And look where it got him. All it did is create misery and death all around him. So this guy is nobody to be giving advice to anyone about glory at all. He's making a speech which should not be made. He should just shut his mouth. And then about 10 minutes after this, he says just the opposite thing to Roger Walton. As he's dying, he says, "Seek happiness in tranquility." He says, Victor is saying this to Roger Walton, the explorer. He says, "Seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries." So again, what a hypocrite. I mean, he's saying, avoid ambition, just be tranquil. Well, Victor Frankenstein didn't do that. His whole life was all about ambition. He doesn't have any call to be giving any sort of advice or any speeches to anyone. He says, "Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world." So he's saying, seek happiness in being humble and just being tranquil, and don't try to do things which are too grand or glorious, like I did. See what happened to me. But 10 minutes before, he was telling the mutinous crew to seek glory. So this Frankenstein seems like a real asshole to me. He's just kind of like making speeches. He's just very, very full of himself. He's such an unattractive character in my mind. That's it. That's really all I wanted to say. Well, I do want to say one thing more. I mean, I read Lolita. I did a review of that, and I think with Lolita, the explosive nature of the subject matter, pedophilia, kind of eclipsed the fact that the book was a brilliantly written book. And I think the reverse can be said for Frankenstein. The highly explosive subject matter, a creature being created out of nothing, that's a very, very glamorous subject. I think that the subject is so glamorous and explosive and hypnotizing that it has eclipsed all of the gaps and all of the faults in the writing, in the actual writing. There were just too many gaps and inconsistencies here for my liking.